Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and our website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast, and we have another fantastic guest on. This is one that's a little bit out of the ordinary, definitely the first one of his kind on this show at least, and I'm going to learn so much today. My mind is going to be blown. Super excited. So if you haven't heard of him, go check him out on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, his website. But his name is Chef Shawn Bucher. And yeah, he is a very accomplished, probably has every designation in the food industry that you could have. And he may tell me I'm wrong, but he's got 6 or 7 of them. So he's got to be up there. Definitely more designations in his industry than I have in mine, by a few. But super excited to have you here and to educate us on not just the kind of the culture and business side of being a chef and what that's like, lifestyle, but also how can we follow our dreams regardless of what they are? How can we begin to monetize our dreams? So take it away. Let us know just a little bit about you, how you found your passion, and how you're currently living that today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on. I started out in this business almost 25 years ago now. I've been around. I started out in a lot of different segments of the industry and kind of moved into others. When I was about 14, 15 years old, I really realized that I wanted to create. I wanted to make things. I wanted to be able to step back and say, wow, I did that. And that was all I knew. And so I started kind of going down the art route where I was painting, I was sculpting, I was drawing, I was doing all sorts of things there. And then my high school guidance counselor came to me and he said, you've got a real passion for this. You ought to take some classes up at the technical college just north of us. And I said, yeah, maybe. And he said, well, you'll get high school credit, college credit. We'll pay for it. And I thought, yeah, I'll check it out. So I was looking through the course catalog and I saw drafting and AutoCAD and all these different things. And then I saw Culinary Arts and I was like, oh, cool. It's an art class. And so I kind of stepped into it thinking that I was going to be doing watermelon sculptures and ice carvings. And the reality of it was that my first day there, the chef instructor was basically like, all right, food for 200 people in the next 20 minutes. And I was like, oh man, what did I get myself into? But it was interesting because, timing plays in a lot into our decisions throughout life, and timing definitely played a lot into this decision to stay in this industry and move forward for me. So this was about 96 or so, 96, 97, somewhere in there. It was the year of the first NBA lockout. And the reason that is important to know is that was kind of what gave me my start in this business. I had been working for a couple of years at a grocery store meat department, cleaning up at night and learning to cut meat. And when the NBA lockout happened, I was just starting my culinary program. And I was in Salt Lake City, Utah, and that was where the Utah Jazz played. And that year of the lockout, it basically created this shortfall of cooks because the season was supposed to start in October, and come January, they wanted to start the season and no one worked there. So it was like the next week, okay, season starts. And so the chef down there basically called every culinary school and program out there and said, if you can breathe, I will hire you. So I showed up my first day. My instructor said, you got to go check this out. And I thought, oh man, I don't even know how to get there. So I rode the bus an hour and a half each way to get there and get home. Got there my first day. Chef's like, okay, why don't you, come over here and mince up this duck? Why don't you? And he was giving me these little menial tasks, and I could tell, but I was this overzealous 16, 17-year-old kid. And I thought, man, I'm going to show him. And so start cutting this duck breast. And the next thing you know, I cut the tip of my finger off. A few minutes later, I had a knife fall on my foot. I had hot turkey juice spill down my front and back. It was just a disaster. And at the end of my third injury, in about a 45-minute time frame, my boss said, "Look, man, just go home. You're not going to survive." And I said, "No, chef, I can do it. I can do it." And came back the next day and ended up spending the next 8 years with him. We traveled around from the arena to then into a hotel, a very large hotel property. Went from there into multi-unit chains. So I went from large arena feeding to more of the multi-units in the hotel, where we had a fine dining restaurant, we had buffets, we had a coffee shop where we were just busy all the time. We had room service. We had an employee eating area that we had to provide food for. So it was just an incredible experience. And then I went into multi-unit chains, and I learned how to manage multi-units. And then from multi-units, I went into owning my own restaurant. I had my own restaurant for a while, and then in right before my 30th birthday, I had to have back surgery because of all the years on my feet, on concrete floors, and the long hours and the fast pace. And I had just done a lot of damage to my body. So at the ripe old age of 29, I had to have back surgery. And that kind of changed things for me, because all of a sudden I couldn't work in operations the way that I had before. I had to figure out a different way to provide a living and an income for my family. And so my my direction was to go into teaching. So I started teaching culinary school, and from there, that was kind of a natural progression into consulting, because as a consultant, you're naturally educating people, and that's where I'm at today. I continue to consult, and I consult in a lot of different industries. I help people create restaurants. I work in large institutions with everything from dealing with union negotiations to designing and implementing new food service concepts and arenas and kitchens. I help transition hospitals from traditional tray line service to room service, so the patients can actually call down and get food that they want whenever they want it, which is a novel concept and awesome in and of itself. And going then along the way there, I've written a few books and kind of tried to provide a path for others to follow also, so that people can kind of avoid some of the mistakes that I made. This industry is synonymous with a lot of negativity, long hours, very difficult, tiring, hot, demanding work, low wages, a lot of addiction, abuse, and just different things of that nature. And so, because of my passion, my love for this industry, that's something that I really want to change, and I've really tried to do that through some of my books and programs that I've kind of helped to put out there. And most recently, I've launched a podcast a couple years ago called the Business Chef Podcast, because in my consulting career, I've discovered that you either have chefs that know food and are incredibly passionate about it and talented, but they couldn't make money to save their lives, or you've got business people that really know how to make a buck, but their food just sucks. And so it's one of those things where we're trying to really combine the two into a winning, sustainable model of making food and making money. And that just happens to be the tagline of the show as well.
Making
So
food and making money.
hopefully that gives you a little bit to work with.
Yeah, no, I love it. Actually, one of the things that is at the beginning. So it's funny because when I was 14 years old, I had I'll say a similar experience, but it was completely opposite, right? I had the experience of kind of the vision of the fact that I was or could become a creator, right? And that realization that I was meant as an individual and as a human, I was meant to create, terrified me, like to the point that I went over to my friend's house and just sat there. And this friend, he was more of like a mentor for me, a much older mentor of mine. He was working in his basement, and I just sat there for an hour. And I was just like, I just don't want to be a creator. Like, just put me somewhere. Let me just live out my life. I do not want to create because I'm scared of failure, and I'm scared of doing something bad or wrong, like the whole idea of creation. And it's interesting because I have a brother who kind of battled. He's a phenomenal artist, and he battled with the same thing with his ability to draw. When he started being really good at drawing, he's like, man, I would hate to be so good and then draw something that was inappropriate or wrong. And it's that type of thing that learning to be a creator is a fascinating skill, if not even like a calling. And it's awesome that at 14 years old, that excited you rather than terrified you.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely did, and it still fuels me today. I I love to create. I love to step back and see it. I just it's an amazing feeling for me, and I think something that I was probably just almost always destined to do.
And I agree. I'm curious, what about it? Because I know that there's other people that are in the same mentality that I was about 12 years ago, right? When I was 14, thinking the same thing. I don't want to be a creator. The idea of it terrifies me. How can all of this be my own doing? And in life, right? In life, we're creators of our life. And so what about creation for you? And we'll call it art. I think that, I mean, I could say my life is a tapestry, and I'm weaving that every day. I'm creating art. I'm painting my life. Every day that I have a dream, I'm going to paint that vision. I'm going to watch it come to pass. And that's my current mentality, that the current state that I'm in. But what about it for you is so uplifting and exciting, the idea of creation, just so people can kind of taste the other side of the rainbow, where they're like, okay, there maybe is something that I desire after.
Well, it's funny because I think part of mine came from, and it's funny because I don't even really remember it very well, but there's a scene in in Pretty Woman with Richard Gere and Julia Roberts where he's talking about how he doesn't want to just take over these companies. He wants to build, he wants to create, he wants to see something and kind of live up to what his childhood dreams were. And for some reason that always stuck with me. And I was probably around that time, that I was, 14, 15 years old, where I had probably seen that movie, and I had kind of somehow realized, that was something that I was drawn to. And it's funny because the more I create, the more I'm inspired by it, the more I want to do it. And I think that's something for a lot of people who really want to create or really want to do something is I think some people can be terrified by it and they can run from it, but I think the more you embrace it and the more you do it, the better you get at it. Practice makes perfect kind of thing. Where I remember writing my first book and turning it over to the publisher and just having it absolutely torn to shreds. I mean, the editors, everybody was not a huge fan of all the content. They loved the idea, the premise, but they didn't love how I was getting there, and we didn't see things a lot of the same way. In hindsight, I probably would have done things a little bit differently, but I'm also glad that I didn't, because I learned a lot from how that whole process unfolded. Remember there just being tons of revisions and it being a very long process to kind of flush things out and get things moving. But at the end, I was happy with it. But I carried a lot of those lessons into my second book and then my third, where it became much more about fulfilling this need for me, this desire to create, but also to help. And that was something that I think I learned really early on, was that my desire to help people, and my desire to educate and encourage and really, um, I don't know, parlay a roadmap, so to speak, of things that would work from my own experiences was really important to me. And so I've always kind of gravitated towards that, where I've said, man, if I can make something, like I just want to make something. I want to stand back, and that can be in a lot of different genres, because I love cooking. I love being able to set out a meal. I love being able to sculpt. I love being able to draw. I love being able to create music. I play the guitar, the bass, the drums. Like I've always kind of gravitated towards creating, regardless of the medium. And so it's just interesting because I think as a creator, it doesn't, you might think what your medium is, but your medium might not always be what you think it is. You might have to go down a path and expose yourself to certain things to really understand what it really is. Because early on, mine was definitely music. And when I was in my teenage years and later teenage years, I was very, very much into that. Whereas the more I started cooking, the more I started realizing that was what I gravitated towards. And then as I got into my mid to late 20s, then all of a sudden it became this focus more on creating the business around the food. And then, as I've gotten even older into my 30s and in mid 30s and later 30s, like all of a sudden I'm kind of looking at, well, what about these mediums of podcasting and television, and these different things. And, it's just interesting to see, because as you create, it leads you down the path, and you just never really know what you're going to create or what medium you're going to use to express yourself.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it's been interesting for me as I've progressed through my mediums of creation as well, to see that. And it's one thing that I found interesting about your story that I think it's common in every successful story that I've seen. Two things. One, and I'm going to call it either your environment or your epiphany moment, right? We have to have something in our mind that we've seen before. We have to have been exposed to something often to have that enlightenment. And for you, as Pretty Women, and that was something like, okay, maybe that's that identity of, or that idea. What could I do with that idea? The next thing is a mentor. And the mentor is so, so crucial. For me, my mentor, when I say mentor, the person who helped me really, how do I say this? He gave me my identity, I guess is the best way to say it. He helped me identify it at a very young age, was my grandfather. We were driving on a home from the dump in his little Ford Ranger pickup, and he turned down the radio, put his hand on my knee and said, "You know what, Sam, you have a voice that's pleasant to listen to. You could lead people and maybe even be on the radio someday." And that was when I was like 5 or 6. And that was the first kind of experience that I had of somebody believing in me. And then fast forward, I remembered that and I was like, man, I would love to be a motivational speaker or somebody who can speak. Now, at that time, I was 6, that was 20 years ago. Podcasts didn't really exist. Like, I never thought I would actually be on the radio. And although I'm not on the radio, podcasting is just another form of radio. It's just a more current form of radio. And so it's been interesting to see how a mentor really can help you identify or guide you down a path to really achieve or find and locate your identity. So that's huge. I'm curious. Well, yeah, I'm curious, when you got into the cooking world, did you have people as you were growing up that were naysayers, people who didn't believe in you and thought, this is a bad way to go. It's not the life that you want. It's not going to be the income that you want, and tried to talk you out of becoming a chef?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the funny thing is that most of those people were in the industry. Most of those people were some of my mentors, some of the people that I worked with, mostly because they didn't really know anything else. A lot of the early mentors that I had were hotel chefs. They were, that's what they had done their whole lives, and that was what they knew. And some of them had immigrated over from Germany, and that was generationally what you did. You went through an apprenticeship at a hotel. You then staged at a hotel, you moved up through the ranks at a hotel, and then you moved on to other hotels. But like, or you went out and started your own restaurant. But most of the time, that was what they knew. And so a lot of them would ask me, well, where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? Where do you want to be in your career? And, a lot of that very early on, I just kind of, because I really didn't know. But later on, the more I stepped back and kind of processed what they were asking me, or what they were looking at, or the reasons that they were asking me those things, was because they wanted me to kind of move forward either faster than they did and have some of those realizations at a younger age, or whatnot. And I was very grateful for that, because, I had some mentors that basically said, look, being in this business is really tough. Are you sure you want to do that? Are you sure you want to work nights, weekends, holidays? And I didn't. Like, they didn't want me to, and I didn't, and that wasn't conducive to the life that I wanted. But, I had to find a way. I had to find a path to do that. Now, I think cooking has given me a lot in life, but cooking is the easy part. The craft of cooking is only part of the journey. And I think when people get started in this business, they think that the better cook you are, the more money you're going to make, the more people are going to hire you, whatnot. But cooking's the easy part. You that's almost the price of admittance into this industry, is you have to be able to cook. And then once you can cook, you have to be able to make money. And then once you can make money, you have to be able to brand yourself. And then once you can brand yourself, you have to know what your vision is for the future, and how you want to brand yourself, and what direction you want to move. Because there's so many different segments and aspects of this industry that you could go a lot of different ways. And so I think it's interesting, because I think a lot of people that were naysayers to me ended up, through their naysaying, opening my eyes to a lot of things, and opening the doors to some different thoughts and different ways of doing things. I kind of a tangent, but I think there's two things that are really missing in schools. I think the two lifelong skills that you will always use that we don't teach in school are the ability to manage your money and really know what that means, but then also the ability to cook, because we all eat. And if everyone had a basic level of understanding of cooking, I think we'd be all be in better hands. Now, with that said, that's the price of admittance into this business. Is once you learn how to cook, that's just the doorway. And then you have to learn all these other aspects of business. It's a business at the end of the day. And I think that's where most people get tripped up. And I think that's where a lot of my mentors and people that really just didn't know any other way, I think that's where some of their deficiencies were as well.
Absolutely. The interesting thing, I mean, there's so much in this that I'm going to kind of do my best to deconstruct here. And then I'm going to give myself a little plug, because I don't know how much you know about what I do outside of this podcast. But I actually, like, my mission and the mission of my firm that I have partnered with is to teach people from all walks of life how money works, primarily the middle income America. And take that role, because you're exactly right. It's not being taught in public schools, and it's hurting. It's not even being taught in private schools a lot of times. It's just not being taught, period, anywhere, college, high school, grade school. It's just not being taught. And so that's a huge area where we're actually focusing on and creating the ability to not only be taught it, but once you are taught it, have somebody who's a professional with licenses to actually assist you in making better decisions with your money after. So that's my little plug. I love what I do, and I love being able to kind of help that area. But something that you mentioned is branding yourself and understanding that it's a rite of passage. In my industry, it's the same way. People like you get licensed, you are able to walk into an industry, and now you have a basic level understanding of financial concepts, and you're able to go teach somebody. that's that's a must to get into the industry. But really, if you are walking in thinking you're going to work for somebody else, I don't care if you are working for a corporation, W-2, paid hourly, or salary for that matter, the less, I guess, the more that you can start thinking about what you're doing on a daily basis as a personal business, then you start thinking about everything different in your life. Even if you are going to go work for a corporation, if you think when you get hired, rather than, hey, I'm being hired as an employee, you think, hey, I'm that person just employed my skill set. I'm the CEO of my life, and my objective is to add value to my life and continue to sell stock in my company. Now, let's say I go work for Walmart. For me to get hired, I had to sell them into wanting me to work with them. If you start shifting the table a little bit and start thinking about your personal brand, that would be awesome, no matter what your career field is, that eventually you have people wanting to headhunt you and companies wanting to have you come work for their company because of the personal brand that you've built up, the personal reputation you've built up in any industry. But I can definitely see how in cooking and being a cook, that could even take on even more importance because of it's just such a high demand for kind of the best in the industry.
Oh, absolutely. But I think you make a really good point, because that's something I have always believed, is that regardless of the industry or regardless of the background of the person, everybody in this country should own a business, whether it's an LLC or an S corp or whatever it might be, because there's just so many benefits to that, and there's so many different ways of setting it up and things. But those are all, those are kind of musts in my eyes, because I've had my own company for a while, and I've been able to experience some of those benefits. But if you've never experienced that, or you have no kind of perception of what that is, it's really difficult to see why. Because a lot of people, when I tell them that, they kind of look at me like, well, why would I do that? I'm not selling anything, I'm not doing anything. It's like, well, you're missing the point. Like, everything that we do every day, there are business principles behind. Marketing is, we're marketing ourselves, we're selling ourselves to our employers, to our future employers, whatever it might be, regardless of whether or not we have a widget or whatever it might be that we're trying to get on the shelf, or we're trying to sell at a farmer's market, or whatever it might be. We are always selling ourselves, especially in the world of social media now. I mean, with social media, there is such a huge opportunity to brand yourself and really create opportunities for yourself that weren't there in the past. I mean, especially in food, especially in the worlds that are very competitive, where people are trying to differentiate themselves. Now you have this platform where you can do that, and you can be authentic, and you can share your message without necessarily having to have a platform like your own show or whatever. But if you really want that, then you have the ability to create that. That's the great thing about where we're at today.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and it's just it's a mindset shift, and it's part of education. It's part of educating people and helping them kind of see why and how and where that would be valuable, and kind of along those same lines. But it's exactly turning whatever they're happy about, whatever they really find the most enjoyment about, turning that into a business, if for nothing else, so that they aren't being taxed on their participation in their hobbies. I mean, like, if for no
Amen.
other reason.
Amen. I totally agree.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. So, if you were to say you had one, or I know you have multiple, but I want you to focus on one specific habit, mindset, or behavior that you've used to create your brand or your legacy.
Oh, I mean, without a doubt, it's persistence and follow through. I think that's the one thing that I have that I've always been good at, is I have always stayed true to my word and said that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, and I'm going to follow it through to the end. And that's the one thing I think that really, over time, I didn't think that I thought that was so common. I thought everybody did that. Like, just because I can do that doesn't separate me from the pack in any way, shape, or form. Everybody does that. But the more experience I've had in all the different segments of my industry, in all the other industries that I've participated in, because, building a restaurant or building a food service concept is very all encompassing. You're essentially manufacturing because you're creating a good or a service that you're providing. You are having to deal with HR issues on a daily basis with employees, because it takes employees to make that whole thing tick. All of your costs of goods are pretty easily identified with your food costs and things. So there's a lot of accounting skills that have to go in. Plus, you're having to market your business. You're having to deal with the real estate end of things, and so there's these are all encompassing kind of businesses that just kind of go across different lines into other business industries. And so, throughout my experience in all those, I've just realized how flaky people are and how fickle we are too, where if it's not bright and shiny every day, we don't always follow through on it. And that's a challenge, because most of the time when you're grinding it out, it's not bright and shiny, and it's not fun, and it's not something that you necessarily gravitate towards or want to do. It's something that you learn how to do when you have to do it. And that's, I think, really what we struggle with nowadays is we want things fast, and we want things with very little effort. And society is rewarding us in a lot of ways. I mean, we have robots that make food now. We have self-driving cars within the next 5 years. We have, a lot of these real time savers that if you look back 100 years, it's a totally different ball game, from the 1920s to where we are now. Totally different ball game. And it's going to continue to be such, but the basic principles and ideals that really made people successful back then, showing up on time, working hard, staying true to your word, those are universal, and those are timeless, and those are things that people are lacking nowadays. I can't even tell you how many interviews I've tried to conduct, even for like vice president type positions, where people just don't even show up and don't call ahead, or don't dress up, or don't look you in the eye when they shake your hand. Like it just amazes me at how these basic principles and these basic behaviors are being overlooked. So I would say that really the key to being successful in almost anything you do is just knowing ahead of time that you're going to have to grind it out. You're going to have to get in the trenches. You're going to have to get dirty, and it's not going to be fun all the time, but persistence, you just got to keep at it. And the more you do, the more things will come to you.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so glad that you highlighted that. It hasn't been brought up in a while on this show, but I think that it is absolutely one of the best skills to have. It's my wife's biggest pet peeve is when people don't follow through, or when they want to just not show up, not give a text, not be willing to commit to anything. And I think it's so true that that really can be the separator of whether you are somebody who's committed to something or not. Is, are you willing to stick with it even when it's not pretty, when it's not fun, and just grind it out because it's worth it in the end. And part of that stress that maybe people are backing away from, you could say, when it comes to persistence is, I think, and this is kind of my mission, but I think a lot of that comes down to they aren't financially prepared to grind it out. They're not in a position financially where they can just grind it out till they win. They have to have something that pays them faster with more immediate return, with the high-paced world we're in. So I'm curious for you, when you started building your legacy, when you were going through all these different transitions, and primarily when you transitioned out of the regular chef world and into the coaching and consulting world, was that a financial stress? Did you plan for it? Did you perceive it many years in advance so you were set up properly? Was there a little bit of instability in the transition? How did that go for you, and how important is it to get set up properly when you make a transition?
Well, the short answer is yes to all of those. I mean, it was, it was a bear, man. There was a lot of late nights. There was a lot of early mornings. There were a lot of missed soccer games and just different sacrifices that I had to make to really make things come through, because, I was not in a position to step away from a full-time job in any way, shape, or form. Food service is not the most lucrative business. Very small margins, not, big payoffs potentially, but you've got to have real high volumes to do that. And to have those high volumes, it requires you to be there. And so, I really struggled getting things up off the ground. But what I realized was, I was never, I didn't have anything where I could just go raise a bunch of money and then just kind of coast. I always had to put food on the table, but then also to be able to get my own thing up and going, it had to be a side gig. So even when I was putting in 14, 16-hour days, again, back to that persistence, I told myself, even if it was 30 minutes, whatever it was, there was going to be something that forwarded my business. There was going to be something that helped progress that aspect of what I was doing, because I knew that if I did little things every day, that eventually they would lead to something bigger, and eventually there would be income there to replace what I was currently doing, to give me opportunities for the future. And so I think that's what a lot of people aren't willing to do. They're not willing to come home and not watch Netflix. They're not willing to come home and not do things that they want to enjoy or they naturally default to. Like people just don't push themselves as much as maybe they could. But really, if we want more, we have to do more. To have more, we have to create more. And that's really where it comes down to, is you have to realize there's always going to be a sacrifice in everything you do. And that's how it was for me. I mean, for years, for 4 or 5 years, it wasn't overnight. Same thing with the podcast. When I got the podcast up and going, I didn't know what I was doing. I had people who were kind of mentoring me and helping me through it and helping me produce it. But at the end of the day, it really came down to me. If I didn't record audio, if I didn't go out and search for guests, if I didn't, put in the time to get it up and going, it was never going to happen. But I knew that once I hit that tipping point, that things would start rolling on their own. But yeah, I mean, we're about 100 episodes into the podcast right now. And I would say it took me 75 or 80 to really figure out what I was doing and put together a system to where I was going to consistently have people on, and I was going to have quality content, and I was going to have it out in a timely manner. We promised a weekly show, and we have not fallen on that since, and here we are 2 years into it. So, again, it's one of those things where you've got to be persistent. You've got to be willing to sacrifice, and you've got to understand that the payoff is not going to be for years down the road. But to your point, when you do make extra money, you put it away. You don't go buy new cars and new clothes and things. You sacrifice, and you put it away, and you put it towards things that are going to increase your business and increase your capabilities to provide and create. And the people that do that, they're willing to do these small things every day, which eventually lead to great results.
Yeah, and that's really what we're chasing, is the results. I love that you mentioned that you have to focus every day on something that's going to move your business to the next level. And that's, for me, it's a kind of a daily habit of just, okay, what is one thing that I'm doing that's going to progress my business? And I guess that's how it started. Now I try and split it pretty down the middle. Honestly, I have about half the day I'm working in my business, on the income producing activities, you could say. And then the other half of the day, I'm really working on my business structures, the marketing, and getting my name more out there. and it's a push and pull. There's a balance, and it's a balancing act. There's no real ever fixed balance, but making sure that every day you're moving the needle in the right direction is important. And that I've absolutely found that to be true in my life, and specifically with the podcast. I think you're spot on with about the 80 episodes. I'm 150, 106, maybe. I don't know how many I'm in right now. Maybe over 200, but it's a lot. I'm doing 3 podcasts a week, or did for the first year and a half. And it's a lot of recording, and to have those show up at the same time every time. It takes a lot more foresight than you think. You think, oh, this guy just publishes a podcast whenever he feels like it. So much more goes into it than that.
So much more. Oh man, so much more.
Yeah. But it's good to have found resources though. And the nice thing is when people then ask, okay, well, what did you do to start a podcast? When I first got into it, a lot of my mentors, the people that I was asking that question to, they were so far ahead. They were 4 or 5 years into podcasting. They had different resources. They had different demands. They had enough that they had everything outsourced basically outside of just recording the podcast. And they were 4 or 5 months in advance. So there was no stress, and preparing and starting off on that foot. It's difficult if you're a brand new podcaster to get to that point. And a lot of the systems that they had in place just weren't even applicable to where the starting point anymore, because they'd so far been past that. And so that's one of my objectives, is to be able to create a course or something where people can know how to actually start a podcast from somebody who's still or who has recently started it, rather than somebody who's way far away.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great resource for people, because it's definitely a growing medium, and it's definitely something that has provided a lot of value to me and given me a lot of encouragement and help on my journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the different mediums? Let's say that somebody loves being a chef, but if they could start today, like over the years of experience that you've had, and they like the chef, they like being a cook per se, but they're wondering, how could I make money outside of like working at a restaurant where my hours are sucky? I mean, because I have quite a few friends who are cooks, and that's their main complaint is they love their job, they love what they're doing, but the hours are crushing them. So what are some other avenues they could express their art or be a creator in their passion, but still produce enough income and time for their family?
Well, it's a great question, and I think that there's a little bit of a curve there, because you may be doing something to have more time for your family, but initially you're probably going to have less time for them. And that's a short-term sacrifice. It may be a year, maybe 2 years, maybe 5 years, who knows, depending on what you're doing. But for me, how it started for me was I started catering on the side. So when I wasn't working, if I had like a Tuesday, Wednesday night off, I would cater things. So I have birthday parties, these women tea groups, these quinceañeras I'd do, like every 3 weeks or something. It seemed like I just did a bunch of those. But I found ways to create additional income initially, doing what I already knew how to do. And then I realized that I was going to always have to do that. If I wanted to maintain the income that I had, I was always going to have to do that same thing. And I didn't want to have to devote all those hours. So I had to figure out a way to systemize what I was doing so that I could generate some passive income. And that was where writing books and teaching courses and creating online courses and doing some of these other things really came into play. Now, I know a lot of people that are in the same boat, where they love their jobs, are passionate about it, but they wish they made more money. They wish they had better hours. But I think one of the steps that you can do is you can really look at what is your job. If your job is working 6 days a week in a restaurant, could you go get a different job? A lot of people that I know, especially later on in their careers, when benefits and paid time off and some of those things become more important, they gravitate more towards, B&I, or like corporate feeding places that are only operating, from 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, with holidays off. Like, they gravitate more towards that. Hospitals and healthcare, they have great benefits. They have much better working hours. Generally, the pay is on par, if not better. So, you could get one of those jobs, which would then allow you more time and more freedom to be able to create some of these things. And that's what I generally tell people to gravitate towards, is trying to find a way, find a position that will give you time to create, time to think up systems or ideas or different ways of generating income. And then from there, since you have that time, then you cut that time up. If you are going to devote at least 20 hours a week to your family, then, and you only have 10 devote to a business, like, that's what you do. But again, there's got to be sacrifices. Like, I think it's fine to play video games and watch movies, but I think if you want more, I think you're going to have to do something that's more constructive, and you're going to have to sacrifice that a little bit. Doesn't mean you totally cut it out, but I think you have the foresight and the planning to say, we've all got the same amount of time per week. And if I'm working 40 hours a week and my commute's an additional 5 or 6, and then I want to spend 20 hours with my family, I want to sleep 8 hours a night, like, you just kind of cut your time up and say, okay, from 9 to 10 p.m., I'm going to do this. And if you're working a non-traditional schedule, then it's from noon to 1 p.m., I'm going to do this. And you really plan out what you're going to do. And then once you're in that window, you just give it your all. And you work that 1 hour for yourself like you would 4 hours for an employer. And everyone knows what I'm saying about that, is that most of the time we don't always give our employers 100% of our effort 100% of the time. But when we're doing it for ourselves, we have much more vested interest in doing that, because it is for ourselves, it is for our family, it is the greater good. So that's what I would tell people who really want a way to kind of transition or get out, is, look around you, find a position that gives you more time. And then once you have more time, figure out a way to monetize that, whether that's catering on the side, or writing books, or starting a podcast, or doing consulting work, but that all comes into branding too. You got to brand if you decide you're going to write a book, you have to brand yourself as an author. And if you're going to write creative and, authority kind of things, you have to become an authority on it, and you have to brand yourself as that and exude that confidence. So, those are all things that I think people need to look at, and they might be general in nature, but they can apply to really almost anybody in any situation in this industry.
Yeah, and I think in any industry they'll apply, and that's why I wanted to ask that question, to make sure that people hear that and understand that it is going to come at a sacrifice. And also, I think time blocking and learning to control your time and let you be in control of your time rather than your activities or whatever else is happening in life, be in control of your time is crucial. I'm curious, because I know you do business coaching, or at least coaching inside of the food industry. But my guess is, just because I know business, that it's applicable anywhere in any business. Where would people get a hold of you? How would they get in touch with you? Where are you hanging out the most if they wanted to have a conversation?
Well, the best way to get a hold of me is probably through the podcast. Businesschef.org is the podcast URL. We're also on social media, at Make Food Make Money on either Instagram or Facebook. And then you can always check me out on LinkedIn, ShawnBucher. I'm the only chef with a whole bunch of letters behind my name. with that name anyway. So,
Yeah, and
but
he's
yeah,
got a lot of letters for sure.
well, it's all a lot of that. Honestly, just to be totally frank with you, is I don't put as much stock in that, but a lot of my clients and customers do. A lot of people see those acronyms and they think, man, he's got all this stuff behind his name. He must really know what he's talking about. The reality is most of those I paid a fee and took a test and was willing to do that. So not to diminish that, but at the
Sure.
same time, there's a perception of value out there. And so to brand myself and to become the individual that people want, I had to kind of figure out what they wanted and then work backwards from that. And that's what they want. So yeah, businesschef.org. I'm also at Twitter, at Chef Shawn B. You can check me out there. But yeah, reach out. Love to touch base, love to chat, love to give encouragement and direction wherever I can.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to hit these last two questions here. Well, this last second to last section, it's actually 5 questions. It's called Legacy on Rapid Fire. It's kind of the game show version of this podcast. I love it. It's one of my favorite parts. And so as we go through these questions, I may have you clarify some of them, but I'm looking for a 1-word to 1-sentence answer to these 5 questions. Fair enough?
Got it. I'm
Okay,
ready.
let's dive in. It is, what is holding you back from reaching the next level of your legacy today?
Fear.
Fear of what?
Fear of failure or fear of success. And I've had both.
Awesome. It's good that you know that. So what is the hardest thing you've ever accomplished?
Probably becoming a father.
Nice. And what is your greatest success at this point in your life then?
Well, ironically, I would say not just becoming a father, but really being able to dedicate time to my family, quality time where I'm 100% there.
Yeah, I love that. What are maybe 2 or 3 books that you'd recommend to the Fuel Your Legacy audience?
Ooh, that's a good one. Well, I'm going to stick with some books that have impacted me a lot in my life. The book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell was just phenomenal, life-changing for me. The book Good to Great by Jim Collins, incredible insights there. Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. I could go on and on, but those are the top 3 that have really changed my mindset and really put me on the path that I'm on today.
Awesome. I love it. I've read all 3, and they are all 3 fantastic books. We'll have links to those in the show notes here, and also links where you can find him. So if you want to just scroll down and click on these, then it'll take you straight to it. Otherwise, you can go search it yourself in the various platforms. This is now my favorite question. This is why I do the whole podcast. The last question here. I'm curious, have you listened to any of my podcasts to the very end?
To the very, very end, I can't say I have.
That's okay. This is a surprise, which I like. We're going to pretend that you're dead, okay? And and we're viewing, okay, your great grandchildren sitting around a table. So this is 6 generations from now. We're viewing them sitting around a table, talking about your legacy. They're talking about what you accomplished, who you were, the type of person you were. What do you want your great grandchildren to be saying about you 6 generations from now?
Boy. I would say that I was a man of integrity and that they respected me.
I love that. Integrity is one of my 3 core values, along with candor and gratitude. And I love that that's one of yours. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're in between cities right now on your way home. And I'm just grateful for you making the time to be on this podcast and share your wonderful insight, knowledge, and credibility to help people see how they can make a big change in their life.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, no problem. And we will catch you guys next time on Fuel Your Legacy. Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me. And if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.